Welcome to the Transfer Pricing Method, the podcast where we break down the complexities of transfer pricing with top industry leaders. My name is Adriaan van Heijden and I will be hosting today's discussion on challenges that in-house tax and TP professionals may face. Today I'm joined by Mariia Aspidova and she's the Group Tax Director at Expondo, bringing over 15 years of specialized experience in transfer pricing and a robust background in international direct and indirect taxation with a focus on Europe, UK and the USA. She excels in managing global TP operations, developing high-quality transfer pricing documentation, and implementing strategies aligned with OECD guidelines and BEPS principles. Her experience includes proactive engagement with internal stakeholders, ensuring cost accuracy, evaluating pricing strategies, and responding swiftly to market dynamics. Let's dive in. Mariia, what are the main issues that you and other in-house tax and TP professionals face when starting a job at a multinational?
Hi, Adriaan. First of all, thank you very much for the invite. I'm really happy to be here and great honor and pleasure. And whenever a TP professional starts a new position at the multinational, in 99%, what would happen, the professional will see a backlog of the TP documentation. It might be absolutely different. So there are different degrees depending on the company stage, but it might be no TP documentation at all. There might be some 1-2 year backlog. There might be TP documentation in place, instead the supported documentation might be missing. The same might be relevant for the benchmark, but the only thing I can assure you, whenever someone would join a new position or would join a position as a TP manager in a company, the most probable issue would be their ATP backlog. So for that should be prepared.
Okay, thank you. And after being an in-house tax professional for many years already, do you have any tips to the tax and TP advisors listening to a podcast that do not have such in-house experience?
Oh yeah. And the main and the biggest advice I can have and would like to deliver is that I really ask people to go beyond the TP policy, because in-house it's all not only the workout on the policy and find the best way what should be in the ideal world. It's always balancing between the knowing how to do and doing actually, because there are quite a lot of circumstances that are not previewed in the policy or in the theory of transfer pricing world, but there are quite a lot of obstacles to overcome before we get to the point when the policy can be actually fulfilled. So I always ask, working with the advisors, I always try to draw a bigger picture, and not only at the stage where we are being only from the TP perspective, like simply we need to develop a new policy or we need to cover the backlog. It's always like we are here at the TP stage and we are here from the information availability stage. We are here from the operational stage. These are the changes that we are being overcoming. And this is something that might be an issue while we're implementing, because depending on that, policy can change quite drastically, and it's actually the factor that always impact how the TP would develop. So my biggest advice is try to help your clients to balance between the ideal status and what actually can be delivered.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a very good tip. Thank you for that. Perhaps going back to the transfer pricing documentation, what is your experience with available TP documentation? I think you mentioned a backlog. Do you have any suggestions on how to deal with such a backlog in TP documentation?
Yeah, for sure. So the first thing that what you are going to do when starting the position and the new role is to find out what exactly is in place, what exactly is missing. As I said, there might be different stages, starting from the no TP policy, no TP documentation, and ending up in having TP documentation for the 2 previous years, but not probably for this particular year. Whatever is the stage, as a TP professional, the person should always first dive deep in the real operational setup. What are the facts and circumstances? What are the functional split? And what are the risk profile? What are the assets that a particular entity have? How was it replicated on the local files? If it's existing, how was it covered by the TP policy? Were there any gaps between the operational setup and the actual substance of the transaction? And the documentation which is here. So the full-fledged analysis of what is being presented should be done. And it's not only about is there local files or not. The analysis should be much deeper. So local files, does it cover the real operational setup? Do you have all the documentation in place, local file, master file, benchmark? Do you have the primary documentation in place, agreements, invoices, whatever can help you? So that would be your basement to look further on. But first of all, whenever there is whatever type of a backlog, you have to understand what was the ground for that. What do you have actually in place? Are there discrepancies between the activities and the documentation, and what are the story behind? And especially very important also to find out if there was any TP audit already. So what the documentation which you have in place already audited by any tax authorities? What was the outcome? Was there any assessment issued? What is the position of the company? Does the company accept this position or not? If the position is accepted, what was the outcome, and if there was any comments to what has been presented, whether any adjustment required. If not, once again, what is the story behind what the company wants to achieve, and if it is actually feasible to achieve. But starting with any backlog, you first have to understand the quality of the information and how the information and the documentation, and if the package is full. So what exactly is missing, what exactly you have where you start working from.
Great. Thank you for that. I think especially for large multinationals, but also for smaller ones, consistency is crucial, but also challenging. How do you deal with this, and how do you avoid that existing TP documentation is not aligned between group entities?
That's a very great question, to be honest, because it's very important documentation is aligned. Whenever it is not, then it becomes a huge problem, while tax authorities do not go likely for the mitigation for any risk that would arise. And I personally deal with that, as I call it, I make the master local file. It means that I take the company which is the main entrepreneur and create the first local file for that particular company, which most likely would cover all the transactions within the group, or mostly all the transactions within the groups. And then this local file is being split to the parts, and the parts are being copied and pasted to the local files of the other companies. Still, it might not be always applicable to the big multinationals where the different teams take care about the local documentation, and there might be different ways how to manage it. But in any case, what is essential that the person who is in charge of TP makes sure that the source of information is always the same. It can be shared either as I do, preparing the template, let's call it like that, or asking one company to prepare all the local files and all the documentation in different countries to ensure that the wording is aligned, or to use different toolings, because right now quite a lot of tools offers this option to put all the information together and then split it to the different local files. But once again, the source should be the same, and the person in charge should make sure that it's being used correctly and there is no customization that does affect the substance and that does affect the perception of the fact in this file. So any tax authority in any country keeping the local file from the local entity should get the same flavor and should get the same picture, the same history about the vision of the company and about the transactions. So that's absolutely necessary thing.
Okay. I think you also briefly mentioned tooling. Is AI that something that also helps, or is it still too early?
I do believe it would help. Personally, I have not yet used it, but I know that this is the part of the development that is on the go, and definitely 99% that would help.
Yeah. Okay. Let's move on to another topic. So transfer pricing documentation is basically documenting things that may also have happened in the past. But if you consider transfer pricing policies, so I think when you start a multinational company, they will already have legacy TP policies in place. What are the steps to consider moving towards a more robust policy and related compliance?
Yeah, of course. But still, the first thing that you start with is to investigate how much the policy which is in place covers all the aspects of the operational activity. And what I personally like to do is to come from the legacy policy to dive deep into transactional level and cover the existing transaction. And what is very, very, very important to try to embrace and see what is the development of the company. So what is the strategy of the company, so that you not only look at the status as of now or as it was, but you always try to find a way how the TP policy can support the future development of the company, and already built in the vision what should be the either functional profile, what might be the function, additional function of this or that company, how would it be priced from the TP perspective, and then how would it fit their entity profile generally. So whenever you have the legacy local files and policy, you consider entities, but what is very important to split it into transactional level, and then you have some kind of Lego, you fill in the entity with different functions, and then you look at the functional profile already with that on the entity level. Still, this two-step approach is necessary. It's not only like you look on the entity level or on the functional level. You always combine it, and yeah, you start with probably functions and then look at the general profile of the entity. But it's also very, as I said, it's very important to know the strategy and development strategy, so that you already know which entities would be able to perceive and consume additional functions which not, and deliver this message to the stakeholders.
Okay. Perhaps to go also back to the transfer pricing policies and also inconsistency. How would you deal with non-consistent TP policies throughout past years? So basically, I think sometimes you may move towards another policy, and obviously there may be certain reasons to do so. Is that something you deal with specifically? Do you make a separate document on it, or how would you deal with this, Mariia?
It always depends. Sometimes there are circumstances that can justify the inconsistent policy. For example, any M&A or the drastic change of the operational activity, that would be a point where you can justify the changes. But if not, you have to fix it. Yeah. When you see that at some point the TP policy is controversial to the operational activity, you have to first find the spot where this starts to happen.
Yeah.
Then you have to find out what was the substance, what were the functions. Once again, try to build a landscape and try to build a story about the actual facts and circumstances, what was happening within the book of the companies. Then work on the possible policies that could have been applied consistently throughout the years. And then when the main challenge would come, you will have to make an adjustment, you will have to make the corrections. What is very important, that the period is in stake. That's one. And another very important point is if there was any TP audit already performed at some point of this journey. And if yes, you're coming back to the question, what was the conclusion? What was the outcome? What was the adjustment? And then you start, if it is acceptable, you start from that point. If it is not accepted by the company, generally find out the substance, find out their arguments. And what is important, there might be controversial policies in the past. You have to understand the reasons, if you can justify it or not. If you cannot, you have to build from the very beginning and probably disregard whatever has been in the past, calculate the financial results, calculate the adjustment that should be done, deliver it, and then start discussing with the different advisors on the VAT, CET side, and TP side as well, how we can deal with that and how we can correct the situation. Because if you see that transfer pricing is not in line with what it should have been, you always have this risk. And what you have to do with the risk, you either you mitigate it and you have to declare that. So there is no other option rather to go and try to fix it.
Yeah, I totally agree. Sometimes though, in practice, I hear that someone prefers to keep as is because no questions were asked by tax authorities. But I always mention that that doesn't mean that these questions won't come in the future. So I totally agree with you.
And that's always, the question, transfer price never has immediate impact. And that's why people somehow think that, okay, we'll mitigate it later on. Unfortunately, that's not the case.
Okay, thank you for that, Mariia. I think a TP advisor may not always be as keen on implementation challenges as in-house professionals. Do you have any tips to the listeners?
Yeah, for sure. So it's not actually the tip for the advisors, but it's a tip to the in-house professionals. Because if the question doesn't come to you, then you cannot answer that. But for the in-house professionals, I would always suggest that you not only work on the TP policy and put it in the framework of your operational activity and your operational life, what you actually can physically do, but also try to go the full path, what the steps after the implementation with your advisor as well. Because that would explicitly show you what would be your blockers, if anything is missing, if you should put some additional steps. And that also would give you rather the much bigger picture, how you can be flexible, what would be your options in case of any force majeure. If plan A is not working, then what would be the plan B? Being an in-house manager, how many implementation you can do? 5, 10, probably. Yeah, but advisors do have much more experience and much more variety of the possible options which you may choose. For example, if you're looking for some allocation keys and information is not available at some point, it's not only you who should build that problem, it should be your partners who help you to set up the policy, to try to find out any intermediary steps, or try to find out what would be your steps to implement the correct changes in the ERP system or whatever system to get your operational TP in place. So at least all the consultants who I was working with, they always help me to do that. Once we set up the policy, I do follow all the steps with my team, how that would work. And then we discuss with the advisors who was helping to set it up. Hey, this is how we come to the conclusion. This is our assumption. This is how we have to work on. And that would be our intermediary steps and the best we can do. Yeah. And with this approach, I have never seen anyone to be reluctant to do so and not to give an advice. If yes, then probably that's a question to an advisory firm.
Okay, good to hear. So thank you for that. Perhaps moving on to the last topic of today. So on stakeholder and controversy management. First of all, who are generally your main stakeholders, Mariia?
Yeah, as transfer pricing is always within taxes or finance, so definitely CFO should be your main supporting force, and all the C-level would be your stakeholders, because tax and the TP in particular are never quite function. That's the people who always go and ask the question, the people who always go and ask something from anyone. So first of all, C-level leaders would be there. Then once you are already settled in the company and know the principal team leaders, then it will be there. But the awareness about the transfer prices should be spread within the company. And to be honest, you should be able to go to the functional leaders, TP leaders, and communicate with them and get the necessary information. Situation might be different. So you might either need really detailed information that only the TP leader can provide you in the short notice, or you should go to the C-level executive leaders to actually introduce the function, to put it on spot, and to explain how important it is, so that they do not block your request, so that they do provide the necessary information or implement the changes or whatever it is. And therefore, TP is very public function, I would say. And the person should be able to communicate with a full range of C-level and also to L2, L3 to get the information and to get mostly that information.
Okay.
That's necessary to to perform the function effectively.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, and tax audits may perhaps be one of the more stressful areas of your work. Without going into too much detail, but do you have any tips on how to best deal with this?
You have to be prepared.
Yeah.
But of course, so my approach and my practical tip would be you have to be prepared from the operational perspective, from the knowing how the company operates, what are the substance, what are the operations, and what is very, very, very important. You have to be prepared from the primary documentation perspective. Because local files, to be honest, whenever you really need it, you can outsource it and it will be ready within 2 weeks. Benchmark, the same story, you can outsource it and it will be ready within 2 weeks. The main challenge with a TP is to actually know the operations, what you would like to present, to know the story that you like to present and that should be presented to tax authorities, and the documentation, the primary documentation, intercompany agreements, intercompany invoices, at least calculations, TP calculations with TP adjustments. These numbers should be ready before the tax authorities would come. These numbers should be delivered to all relevant stakeholders. These numbers should be discussed, because whatever you would present will have the significant impact on the financial statements and the taxes. So you have to be prepared in terms of a substance of your TP policy that is being implemented. That's the main most important, I would say. So, as I said, formal documentation, I do not say that it's not important and you don't have to do that, but it might be prepared as soon as you have all the underlying documentation package and calculation and understanding. It might be prepared quite fast. Not a fact, but there is a possibility to do that. But if you don't have intercompany agreements, if you don't have the understanding on the adjustments on the numbers and on the operational reality of the company, on the functions and the risks and assets profile, it will be quite challenging to go through the tax audit.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. And perhaps as a last question, and that's something I hear from more professionals, as is also from my experience, when large M&A transactions or restructurings are at the table, tax is usually not involved from the start, and it's only involved when the transaction is already a go. Is that also your experience? And do you have any suggestions how to make the board more aware of tax risks that may be involved in such transactions?
Yeah. Coming back to the backlogs, whenever you come to the new multinational, if the taxes was not, TP was not involved from the very beginning, you will immediately discover that. And of course, to make this visible and to communicate on this topic to the board members or to get the support from any external stakeholders who are not really in TP, you have to build a case. So whatever has happened, you have to build the case. You have to show what additional burden right now within the company to put the transaction that has already happened into compliance. What the cost of that? If you need an additional people, you need initial tooling or whatever it is. And definitely the main factor here would be the cash outflow impact and the impact on the financial statements of the entities. So on whatever development, because that would strike the most. The cash outflow, but definitely the best indicator of how important is to involve transfer pricing specialists in the taxes before anything has happened. Because after something has happened, and within the strategy of the company development, it might create the need to move something within the group from one entity to another entity. The worst case scenario would be from one country to another country. And it's always quite painful to establish all the documentation, to make all the researches, then to see how would it impact on the entity level and how would it impact on the general cash outflow. So definitely one time it can happen. Then you build the case, then you show the outcome, then you show the risks. And after that, I believe that should not happen anymore. So.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for that, Mariia, and for contributing to this podcast. Let me try to summarize what we've discussed today, and please feel free to add anything afterwards. So I think backlog and transfer pricing documentation is very common at multinationals when someone is joining a new company. Obviously improving this may help the robustness of the firm. So first look at what is in place and then what is missing. As a 3P professional, dive deep into the functional analysis, so the function performed, risk assumed, assets used, and how this is replicated in the local files. And also align substance with your transfer pricing documentation. So I think those items are key. Obviously, like you also may have a certain storyline on certain positions, which may also consider previous tax audits, for example. It's always good to also implement that in your documentation. Consistency and alignment in transfer pricing documentation is also crucial. Make sure that the source of information is always the same. I think that's also a key challenge for multinationals, especially when you prepare documentation, not at that moment, but a few years later. For transfer pricing policy implementation and improvements, do not only look at what is in place now, but also where you're going on a strategic level. I think that was an important tip. Also, don't be afraid to change transfer pricing policies. Improving and building a storyline around it may help you in the future. A general tip for advisors, go beyond the transfer pricing policy. So balance between knowing how to do something and actually doing it. A tip for in-house tax professionals is try to give a full path and steps after advisor already has delivered its work. So it gives you a bigger picture, and an advisor may then also better support you on potential implementation and improvements in that field. And I think as a last item, trying to summarize on the tax audits. So be prepared from an operational perspective and a documentation perspective. Some main challenges are to actually know the operations, and the primary documentation should already be in place, right? And company agreements, invoice, etc. That's something you cannot really change afterwards. While, for example, TP documentation may sometimes be prepared on short notes as well. So having the actual facts, the substance, and the related documentation in place is crucial. Did I miss anything, Mariia, or do you have any final words for this podcast?
No, that's actually what we have discussed, but probably I remember that I have missed something because for the TP documentation, the readiness for the audit, we always worry about the local requirements because in some countries, the TP documentation should be stamped at the time when it has been prepared. And yes, operational perspective is important, but be also always mindful about the local requirements as well, because sometimes it's not enough. Sometimes it's not enough. But generally, that was what I really wanted to touch upon today. And thank you very much for the summary.
Okay, thank you, Mariia. Perfect, and then thank you for contributing to this podcast. That's a wrap for today's episode of the Transfer Pricing Method. If you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your network. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode of the Transfer Pricing Method. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye.